Listen with me, it should be on the screen as well, as I read a small portion of the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. Jesus says, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Now really, if we were looking for a New Testament commentary, something pithy and short and to the point that would summarize the book of Ecclesiastes, these few lines from Jesus make a pretty good summary. And they're such important and timeless words because it's a temptation for all of us to make this world our home. And it just was never meant to be. We are pilgrims in this world, and we're to live this life looking forward to the city whose architect and builder is God. But we're down here, and we build houses that we love, and we try so very hard to make this world our home. We hold too tightly and love too deeply the things of earth, but Jesus warns us that they won't last. And because they won't last, they can't deeply and fully satisfy. Because they won't last, we need to let them lose their grip on us. And they do have their grip on all of us. We need to see this world for what it is. That the things of this world were never meant to last. Or, as this teacher says it, there is no gain under the sun. The problem we have, and it's the same for the teacher, is that we don't really believe that. There's some things in us that makes us think, well, they might last. We might be different than our previous generation, or we don't really believe that our own days will one day come to an end. That's important for us to know about ourselves. You know, even if the teacher did hear Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he might have been one who needed to discover these truths on his own. And that's what we'll see in our passage today. Our text, kind of the second half of chapter 1 all the way through chapter 2, is a sort of autobiography of this teacher's pursuit of joy and happiness. And we're going to see where he ended up in his search. And kind of what we find at the end of this search is going to be one of the first rays of light that pierces in this dark book. You might be thinking he could have just given us the answer. Why are you going to tell us this long story? But the teacher doesn't think that would be enough for us. He wants to convince you and me that he searched out every way, in ways and in places and in lengths that no one else could, so that you would believe him. And he shares so that he spares you the heartache of trying to find it yourself. Where does he end? Well, a couple of places. But his final takeaway is a revelation that only could come from God. Life is a gift from God. That's what he takes away, and that will be our main point today. So if you're taking notes, kids and adults, you can write that down. And if you don't listen to anything else, I hope you do, but if you don't listen to anything else, that is something you can meditate on and think about throughout the week. Life is a gift from God. Now, we are in a new book, and so let us together remember a few things about Ecclesiastes. The main phrase is repeated nearly 40 times. It's the Hebrew word hebel. It can be translated as futility, vanity, absurdity, meaningless. Even last week we considered how it could convey the idea of a breath, right? The momentary lasting of a breath. Life is a breath. We'll also hear under the sun a bunch of times in the book and today, and that phrase refers to life as we know it. Life here on earth. Life that spans the time between birth and death. And also the word gain. which is going to be important for us today. Gain refers to what's left over, what remains. Look with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. And you're going to hear how the teacher uses these three phrases as he sets his main point for the book. Absolute futility, says the teacher. Absolute futility. Everything is futile. What does a person gain for all his efforts that he labors at under the sun? Now, in other words, if we're rephrasing his main point, because we live in this world, no matter what we do or how hard we work, there is nothing that remains at the end of our life. There's nothing that we can take with us, right? We lose it all, and so it's all meaningless. We saw last week in verses 4 through 11 how the teacher used nature and life in general as evidence, right? The sun as the first example. It rises in the morning, and then it sets at the end of the day. Then it returns to where it was yesterday. It's a lot of work, but not a whole lot of change, right? And it all repeats. Same with water, right? The streams flow into the sea. The water evaporates, then it rains, and then it flows into the stream, into the sea. And just this repetition of life, these patterns, right? And so he points out the reality and these boundaries, these limitations of life under the sun as observed primarily in creation. Now, in this next section, he'll give us his own experience as evidence to show that there is no gain and it's all futility. But let's ask the question we asked last week, and we'll make sure we keep it at the forefront of our mind. Why? Is the teacher just a dark person? Is he depressed and cynical? No, that's not what's happening. Remember, the teacher is so much more than just an angry, upset person at life, right? What he's doing is purposeful. He is destroying so that he can build. You see, we know that a bigger house won't fix our problems. But when we think of having a bigger house, it does sound nice, and we tend to think it will fix some of our problems. Right? We know that money isn't the answer to our sorrows, but if we did win the lottery or had a secret relative who just left us a lot of money, we have a list of things that we would do and we think it would solve many of our problems. You see, all these passions and pleasures are like bubbles that we build our lives in. And the teacher, with purpose, goes around and he's popping those bubbles. You're setting your hope on a bubble is what he wants us to see. Right? He's bursting those bubbles so that we can know how to live well in this world, all the while we set our eyes and our hopes on the world to come. Now we're going to walk through this passage. It's a longer passage, but we're going to walk through the passage as he tells a story. We're going to consider 3 investigations, his response, and the revelation that he comes to at the end. We're going to move through it kind of quickly, reading lots of passages, but I won't say too much about each one, because we're going to be helped to see it as a whole. See his findings as a whole. But I do want to point out, if you do have further readings and studies yourself, each one of these sections that we're kind of calling investigations, each one also has a conclusion. He includes a reason for his findings and then a reflection on what he's found. But we're going to look at them all as kind of one section at a time. So, if you have your Bible, do open to Ecclesiastes. Did I say cheese? Ecclesiastes. Let me drink some water and we'll try that again. Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 12. If you don't have your Bible with you, you can follow along on the screen. I, the teacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my mind to examine and explore through wisdom all that is done under heaven. God has given people this miserable task to keep them occupied. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun and have found everything to be futile, a pursuit of the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, see, I have amassed wisdom far beyond all those who were over Jerusalem before me. And my mind has thoroughly grasped wisdom and knowledge. I applied my mind to know wisdom and knowledge, madness and folly. I learned that this too is a pursuit of the wind. For with much wisdom is much sorrow. As knowledge increases, grief decreases. So in his first investigation, he uses his wisdom to look into life's pursuits in general. So he's just generally looking at life's pursuits. And he comes to the conclusion that all of the things that life offers is vanity. It's meaningless. It's a breath. It's like a pursuit of the wind, which is another phrase that's commonly repeated. I think it's 7 or 8 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. I have to enunciate very clearly with that word today. This imagery of chasing the wind helps us to have a clearer concept of what he means by futility. Let me ask, and maybe kids, you can participate in this. Have you ever tried chasing the wind? Have you ever caught it? Right? No, that's now it's fun to run around in the wind and figure out where it's coming from. The Bible tells us we don't know where the wind comes or where it goes. And so chasing it would be meaningless because you can never grasp it. And that's what he's trying to explain here. Now, it might seem that he comes to this conclusion kind of quickly. We're just a few verses in and he's already decided it's all meaningless, right? But he has his reasons. 2 we can consider. For one, he is seeing that things that are done are forgotten. Accomplishments fade away quickly. No job that he saw people work or he himself worked will deeply satisfy. No amount of money will provide your heart's deepest desires. And so all these things fade away. But the second thing he notes is that there's a twisted mess that we try to straighten. Right? We see that which is crooked and we try to straighten it, but we can't. Right? The way of the world can't be tamed in such a way that we are able to get what we want out of it. And you know that. Some of you know that very well from experience. You try so hard and you labor for so long and you just can't seem to get things to line up. Now, one of the books that I've really enjoyed reading and benefiting from as I've studied for this series is David Gibson's Living Life Backward. Highly recommend it. We'll eventually get it into the library, so at least you have access to it. I will be quoting him throughout this series, I'm sure, a lot. And he writes that life is messy and complicated and doesn't always work. And sometimes the best thing to do is just accept it. Now, that's not an answer in and of itself, but it helps to explain part of our problem. And we can agree with Gibson that life is messy and complicated, but we still expect it to work out. We strive in vain not to accept some realities, and so we might as well describe our efforts, our entire life, as chasing the wind. Even wisdom, he points out in this passage, which he repeatedly shows as a good thing and something to be valued. But even wisdom has its limits when it comes to gain, right? That's which is left over, and happiness. Now, in some ways, it is true. The more you know and the more you learn about life helps you to navigate life and the challenges here, so it does bring some happiness. But what he points out is that with the increase of knowledge, you also get to see the brokenness of the world and the despair. And so grief will also increase. That's investigation number 1. His second investigation comes in the first 11 verses of chapter 2. Now he moves from observing how people live to now indulging himself in the best things of life. So investigation 1, general pursuits of life. Now he's going to consider the best things of life. Look with me as he considers pleasure as one example, verses 1 through 3. I said to myself, go ahead. I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy what is good. But it turned out to be futile. I said about laughter, it is madness. And about pleasure, what does this accomplish? I explored with my mind the pull of wine on my body, my mind still guiding me with wisdom, and how to grasp folly until I could see what is good for people to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Now notice with me, he says that he's looking to enjoy what's good. Right? He wants to know what is good for people to do under the sun, under heaven, during the few days of their lives. So he is on a purposeful search. Let's keep reading. Verses 4 through 11, we'll see how he considers possessions and property and passions. I increased my achievements. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself and planted every kind of fruit tree in them. I constructed reservoirs for myself from which to irrigate a grove of flourishing trees. I acquired male and female servants and had slaves who were born in my house. I also owned livestock, large herds and flocks, more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. I also amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I gathered male and female singers for myself, and many concubines, the delights of men. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also remained with me. All that my eyes desired, I did not deny them. I did not refuse myself any pleasure, for I took pleasure in all my struggles. This was my reward for all my struggles. When I considered all that I had accomplished and what I had labored to achieve, I found everything to be futile and a pursuit of the wind. There was nothing to be gained under the sun. Did you notice the description that he used to describe what he built for himself in the first few verses of this section? It kind of sounds like the Garden of Eden. Right? He built something that's nearly perfect. And who did he do it for? Himself, myself, right, as the text says. And that word jumps out of the text because it's repeated 6 times, verse after verse. Excuse me. Vineyards for myself, silver and gold for myself, singers and reservoirs for myself. And even more times, if we count the other times he says my, right? All that my eyes desired, my struggle, my reward. Now, as I was preparing, I was thinking if we were in our community groups doing the 7 Arrows inductive Bible study, we would note, whether all of us or a few of us, and we consider together as a group, how all of this focus on himself will later contrast with how he looks to God. Right now his eyes are on himself. And then towards the end of the passage, we're going to see a huge contrast, how he looks to God. And we'd see how big of a breakthrough he has when his eyes are no longer on himself, but on God. And it's then that he gets the revelation that life is a gift from God. But we'll get to that soon enough. Ecclesiastes, just to comment again in these first few sermons of the book, be kind of making comments on the book as a whole as we're understanding it. It's a new book for us. It's a different style of writing, right? It's wisdom literature. And so I'll point out that Ecclesiastes is a different style of writing. And so some of the concepts that the teacher presents, he'll bring them up in one chapter, but he doesn't really address them until later on. He doesn't develop what it is until later on. And so that happens with the word reward. I want to be able to point that out for us. Reward isn't gain, right? It's not something that lasts. But reward is the joy and the portion that comes from the experience itself. Look again with me to the second half of verse 10, or you can just listen along. He says, I took pleasure in all my struggles. This was my reward for all my struggles. So again, we're not going to develop it fully because he doesn't develop it fully, but this is an important clue for his later revelation. And we will come back to this idea of reward, and even how it contrasts with gain throughout the book. Sometimes we say, well, I know these things won't satisfy me, but I've never been a millionaire, right? I know that the pleasures of this world or nightlife, or whatever it is, whatever we fill in the blank, I know that won't satisfy, but there might be something within us that says, but I've actually never tried it. So how do I know? The teacher is not in a category like you or me, right? Anything he wanted, he was able to get, right? We're told that he didn't deny himself of anything, and that's for our benefit, so we can see. We might not have tried all the goods and the bads and the uglies of this world. And that's by God's grace, truly. But he's saying he has. He's saying, listen to me. And again, remember, anything he saw and desired, he took for himself. He had the means and the power to do that. He left no stone unturned in his pursuit for gain. And yet he found that there was nothing to be gained under the sun. All the concerts, imagine having your own singers. I guess that's what it's like before having, I was going to say iPod, and that was going to age me. But whatever, our phones, our streaming services. Goodness, I'm at the age now I have to be mindful of the examples I use. He didn't have the access to music, and so he brought singers. And he purchased them, and they just sing me this song, and they would sing. Right? He had all the concerts and the wealth and the pleasures and the debauchery and the property. All futility, he said. Let's keep reading and look to this third investigation. Again, he's been using his great wisdom. Remember, we're seeing it. He says, I didn't lose my wisdom. I still had it with me. Right? So he's been using his great wisdom to consider all of these different aspects of life. Now, he turns to wisdom itself to see if there's any gain in knowledge, and kind of almost a spiritual journey, if you will. Chapter 2, verses 12 through 16. Then I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the king's successor be like? He will do what has already been done. And I realize that there is an advantage to wisdom over folly, like the advantage of light over darkness. The wise person has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I also knew that one fate comes to them both. So I said to myself, what happens to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been overly wise? And I said to myself that this is also futile. For just like the fool, there is no lasting remembrance of the wise, since in the days to come both will be forgotten. How is it that the wise person dies just like the fool? Now, one note to remember from last week. These are questions that you've had, unless you're always distracted. But there are moments in life where you just say, what is the point? But we don't like that question because we don't want to think about the potential answers. And so we say, here's my iPod, right? Let me pull out my shuffle, whatever it is. Go on MySpace. I'm trying to think of whatever things I can say. Right? Let me distract myself in some huge way because I'm not sure what will happen if I think about these questions for too long. And here's why we need Ecclesiastes. Here's why we need the teacher. The teacher is pressing those questions on our behalf. He's pushing us to places that we don't want to, so we kind of want to trust him along this way. Now, so some people have read Ecclesiastes and think that what he's saying is wisdom isn't worth anything. But he makes it clear that wisdom is better than folly. It's the same way we can compare light with dark, right? Light is better than dark, and the scriptures are clear about that. But when it comes to his exploration to find gain, something that lasts under the sun, neither wisdom nor folly can save you from death. Here we are, back at death again. All right, it was implied in all the other investigations that he would be forgotten or going away, but now it's very clear. It's clearly stated here. that death is the needle that bursts the bubbles we try to build our lives within. I'm going to get that house, but I will die, right? Whatever it might be. Now, in regard to wisdom, what's the point of it in light of death? That's what he's saying. He's not saying what's the point of wisdom, but when it comes to gaining something that lasts under the sun, he's saying what's the point? It's as if he's standing in a cemetery and he's looking at two graves. One of a wise and a benevolent man who is loved by all. The other of a town drunk. Both laying side by side at the end of their lives. He would even go to say, if this was his illustration, give it a few generations and the weather will come, we'll blur off the tombstone, we won't even know which was which anymore. It'll be forgotten. And so the teacher says, what's the point? Now, one of my favorite songs happens to be written about Ecclesiastes, and I've shared it already, and I'm sure I'll share it more. And the opening lines say these words. Wisdom is good. It puts eyes in your head, right? That's straight from the scripture. But it's foolish to think it'll save you from death. And that's what the teacher's saying here. But here's what he doesn't see yet. The reality and certainty of future death puts eyes in our head. Right? Death is the lens that allows us to see life under the sun as it is. And therefore, here's the hope. Therefore, we enjoy it for what it is. You see, without the reality of death, we live our lives as if we're ultimately in control. And so, we try to control our lives for gain, right? For what we think we can get out of life or out of these experiences, out of these possessions and these pleasures. But when we're able to see that there's no gain under the sun, we're free to see life as a gift. Let me say that again. When we're able to see that there is no gain under the sun, we are freed to see life as a gift. Again, we're going to spend more time on that at the end when he comes to discovery. The three investigations of the teacher are all like chasing the wind, and here's his response. Verses 18 to 23, his response was to hate life. Let's look at that together. Chapter 2, verse 18 through 23. I hated all my work that I labored at under the sun, because I must leave it to one who comes after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will take over all my work that I labored at skillfully under the sun. This too is futile. Right? Do you hear? He's saying, I could live a good life and build something worthwhile, but the king that comes after me might tear it all down and sell it because he wants more concerts or whatever it is, right? He might not be wise like himself. Let's keep reading. So I began to give myself over to despair concerning all my work that I had labored at under the sun. When there is a person whose work was done with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and he must give his portion to a person who has not worked for it, this too is futile and a great wrong. For what does a person get with all his work and all his efforts that he labors at under the sun? For all his days are filled with grief, and his occupation is sorrowful. Even at night, his mind does not rest. This too is futile. And you recognize this, right? It connects with us, doesn't it? You have a hard job. Hard because of various reasons, which makes you despise your job. You finally get to leave your work. And you go home and you can't sleep because you're thinking about your work. You're saying it's miserable. It's meaningless. He hated life. He hated work. He saw no purpose in any of it. But because he couldn't find what he was looking for, right, this gain, he despaired. Here's where it turns. Thank you for staying with me and the teacher until this point. It was in his despair that was the gateway to his joy. Just, I guess, told the kids, sickness is needed to appreciate health. His grief, that point of giving up, was what he needed to reach in order to see joy, right? He finally saw what he wants us to see. Life isn't something you conquer or try to master, but life is a gift to be enjoyed. That's how we're supposed to read these last verses. Look with me to verses 24 to 26. His revelation. So we had 3 investigations, his response, and now revelation. There's nothing better for a person than to eat, drink, and enjoy his work. I have seen that even this is from God's hand, because who can eat and who can enjoy life apart from him? For to the person who is pleasing in his sight, he gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and accumulating in order to give to the one who is pleasing in God's sight. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. I appreciate what Gibson has to say here. He pulls out that famous phrase, which I think is one of the most quoted, at least misquoted parts of Scripture, even by non-believers, right? People wouldn't call themselves Christian. They say, well, we're supposed to eat, drink, and be merry, right? And so he pulls out that quote and says, some say eat, drink, and be merry because that's all there is. The preacher says, eat, drink, and be merry because that's what there is. That's so good. That was like a key to understanding what's happening here, right? Eat, drink, and be merry isn't our way to get what we can out of life and our way to get back at God. Well, there's nothing worth it, so I'm just going to drink. That's my transition to get a sip of water. Right? No, this is what there is for us to enjoy. This is what God has given. What is good is given by God. And the teacher realizes that all these gifts are from God's hand, and we can't enjoy life apart from him. We read that together, didn't we? Life is given by God. We're not to strive after it. We're to receive it. And I wonder if anyone can help me find a connection to Jesus here. But I want to apply his findings to our life, and we'll close that as sort of application. But first, let's consider together God's greatest gift to us. Just like the teacher searches and works for something that lasts, we also search and work for what will save us, to make ourselves right in the eyes of God. But that's never been possible. That's just not the way that God has ordered it. And so it's not something that we can achieve. Life, dear friends, is a gift. Salvation is a gift. It can't be found in this world. It must come from above. And so, from above, Jesus came down, living in our place and dying in our place. You see, salvation isn't something we can strive after and earn. It's a good gift from God, available to all who believe. And what you need, maybe I should say it this way, all you need is need. To see that you cannot save yourself, and to see that he is the giver of life. Friend, if you're here this morning, you have questions about God's good gift of salvation and what it means to believe, please don't leave this place without speaking to someone. Chat with a friend who invited you. I'd love myself or any of the pastors to speak with you as well. Now, as we close, here's what I want you to consider, and not just now, but later today and throughout the week. Let this meal we're having together Sunday morning bear its fruit in our lives throughout the week. Let's meditate on together. And this is what I want you to think about and consider. why do you expect so much from every part of life? Let me say that again. Why do you expect so much from every part of life? One of our problems is that we want everything in life to be everything that it could be and more. We're expecting too much. Every meal you eat out, you want it to be the best meal. Or every conversation wants to be deep and fulfilling. Every activity needs to be more than just the activity. Right now, this isn't about lowering your expectations so that you'll be happy with less. It's about rightly understanding the world that God created and how we are to live in it. So actually, I guess maybe, yes, it is a little bit about lowering your expectations in this life under the sun. Why? Because we're not in heaven. And too often we hold on to the things of this world because we think we can make it a heaven on earth. That's not what God has designed. Go ahead and write this down. Hold on to it and try to think about it. It's going to help you to meditate and apply on the teacher's revelation. The reality of a future death frees us to daily delight in God's good gifts. I'll say that again. The reality of a future death frees us to daily delight in God's good gifts. And I think hearing from Tim Keller will help us here. Tim Keller was diagnosed with an aggressive cancer about 5 years ago, and he's been with the Lord now for about 2 years. He shared that once he and Kathy accepted that this diagnosis would lead to his death. Or once they accepted that. Okay, here's, he mentioned how much they prayed that it wouldn't be cancer. But once it was cancer, they accepted the truth that this would lead to his death. It might be in a year, it might be in 3 years, it might be 5 years, but eventually this would cause his death. And it was once they accepted that diagnosis and that it would lead to death, it was at that point that they found themselves enjoying their days more than they ever had. Why? They enjoyed the moments for what they were. Moments to be enjoyed. The good things of life that they enjoyed before, like vacations or dinner parties, had too much pressure on them, just like we put too much in every meal. We want too much from everything we do. Or it had to be the best vacation. It needed to be the best dinner party. And that need for it to be all that it could be and more, it took away from the joy that it was able to give. But when the reality of the end was clear, the good gifts could be just that. He says how they enjoyed each walk they took together in ways that they never did before. The food they tasted was better. They enjoyed every hug. Their enjoyment was their reward. Back to that word, that's a bit of a key to our understanding. Not something that they could keep forever, but something good that they could enjoy. And then here's what he said. When you don't put unrealistic expectations on the things of this world, you can begin enjoying the things of this world. Here's another way we can think about it as we come to a close. We're asking too much of our knefe. Knefe. What can I say about knefe? It is God's good gift to us. To our people. All of a sudden we became lively again. See how good knefe is? But knefe was never meant to solve all my problems and fulfill me deeply. Now, putting that much expectation on knefe will let you down and will take away the joy that it can give. Poor knefe. But when I know that knefe is just knefe, and that delicious treat will last me just a few minutes, I can enjoy it as a gift from God and thank God for it and delight in Him, in what He has created. So I'm expecting too much from my knefe. You are expecting too much from your work. And you're struggling in work because you need it to do more than it can for you. Some of you are expecting too much from being a parent. And the joy that comes with this gift is slowly drowned out because you're attaching identity and fulfillment and purpose to something that was never meant to hold all of that. Some of you are expecting too much from your health. As soon as it's gone away, you say, I've worked in all these ways, and yet I'm still struggling. And the list can go on and on of the good things that we have under the sun that we are trying to make ultimate and trying to make last. Trying to squeeze out what was never intended. And friends, when we do that, we're missing out on what is good. And if we do that, we will end up like the teacher and saying, what's the point of anything? But there is a point, and we're going to continue to see that. But enjoyment is a reward and is a way that we can glorify Him. And so, instead of using these gifts as a means to a greater end, let's take time to live inside the gifts themselves and see the hand of God in them. Amen.